coroner ruled it as acute alcohol poisoning, and they include this death by misadventure. They'd have the guys go through 3 or 4 songs, and when he had heard enough, what might be mid-song or whatever, he would just take his finger and just put it right underneath his throat, like in the sort of throat slitting notion, and then everything would just stop. They would just pull the plug.
All done. You are listening to Tape Spaghetti, the podcast about the twisted and tangled innards of the music industry. Some of this content may not be for all listeners or viewers, so if it's not for you, no harm, no foul. We'll just catch you on the next one. All right, without further ado, let's get into it. Here we go.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Tape Spaghetti. I am Scott Marquardt, joined, as always, by the infamous Blake Weiland. Blake, how you doing today?
Infamous. I'm really excited. I get really excited to do this. I record a lot of podcasts, and they're always fun, but I get really excited to do this one when you're gonna take the lead, because I learn stuff.
That's the nice thing. I also like when I get to sit back a little bit and learn about something that you're going to tell me.
Mm-hmm. It's fun.
And, to the listeners, we kind of share what we're going to talk about, but no, we don't search it together or anything. It's very much a one-sided exploration.
Yeah, I think it's more fun that way. We were surprising each other, and then we accidentally almost researched the same things a couple times and realized that's a waste of time. Yep. So we should tell each other what we're working on.
Yes, we like all couples that have been together for a while, eventually realize that we should communicate.
Yes.
Not all do, but we had that moment of, our lack of communication is causing a problem.
It is. I can't just grunt at you and have you know what I mean.
I mean, we're pretty close to that at this point, honestly. Yeah, I think, I'm about as close with you at that as I am with my wife.
Yeah, you're the only one. Yeah, it's and longest running relationship too. Is my wife and I have been together for almost including dating, almost 20 years.
Yeah, and to the listeners out there, Blake is not a man of the age of 45 or 48, as you would expect, to have been married. Blake was married in a small ceremony as a young child.
I was a child bride, yes. And I was fine with it. It was fine.
Hey. Speaking of beautiful brides, I appreciate your shirt of the state bird of Tennessee, Dolly Parton.
Oh, yes. I got this shirt at Dollywood, and I love Dollywood. Dollywood is an incredible amusement park. I highly recommend it. And Pigeon Forge is one of the strangest towns I've ever been in.
It's a very odd place. Yeah. I went this past summer. I've been a number of times to Gatlinburg and Pigeon Forge, but I went with my little nieces, which that made it fun because it's fun for them,
Yes. The Great Smoky Mountains, I have to say, I'd never seen them before that trip. And it's a little different over here.
Yeah, they're not the Cascades. They're not like the PNW or the Rockies.
I was like, these are the Great Smoky Hills.
They are. Though it's interesting because they're the oldest mountain range on the world. In and on. Yeah, both are true. They've just been slowly sort of weathered over time.
It is beautiful, though. I want to go back in the fall. And see
that's the time to go for sure. We would always go, growing up and in college and early 20s, we would all rent some giant cabin for 80 people.
Yes.
And bring everyone and go and make pancakes and drink a lot of beer.
Oh man, that's kind of what we did a little bit.
Yeah. That's what it's for.
We sat in the hot tub during the thunderstorm, and that was awesome.
Oh heck yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it was great.
I love that.
We all really want to go back. We had so much fun. So that's going to happen again one of these days.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of Appalachia, that's a very loose segue to, the Appalachia of the world, Australia.
I thought you were going to say, speaking of having a ton of fun, but I'll go with this.
That would also work.
Yes.
So I know a few Australian people, and they're just lovely folks. I think Australia is kind of Australian and American people are have a certain kinship. We're the two places that the British sent their bad people, and that turned into a whole country down the line.
So well, the difference is we chose to go and they were forced to go.
Some of us. This was also a penal colony, just like Australia. And Blake, don't you get too excited with me saying penal colony. It's not that kind of penal colony.
It's a penalty colony.
Correct.
Right?
That is exactly right. Yes.
All right. Okay. Yes.
But
yes.
I think one of the best things about the Aussies is their tendency to they like to shorten every word and turn it into some sort of like very cute nickname.
Yes.
You know, like we all hear the shrimp and the Barbie thing, though I don't know if they really say that, but there's a lot of fun ones. Like I know McDonald's is Macca's.
Macca's
famously.
Okay.
And one, let's see if you can guess this. I don't know if you know this or not. So there is a band, which in fact will be the subject of what we're talking about today.
Okay.
Wink, wink. That is from Australia. Can you first of all, well, I already told you, you don't have to guess that part. It's AC/DC, I think the most legendary band from Australia over history.
I thought you were going to say Tame Impala, but
well,
okay.
Tame Impala is pretty big these days, but yes. I don't think they're quite at the level. But can you guess, Mr. Weiland, what the Aussies call AC/DC?
Oh, they shorten AC/DC?
Well, they actually don't really shorten it. But they have a pet name.
I do not know, but I'm going to try to take a crack at this. They call it like, I don't, I don't know.
You're close. You're close. Yeah.
What do they call it?
So the Aussies call AC/DC Akadaka.
Oh, okay. Yeah. That follows with the McDonald's thing. Okay.
It does. Yes. I planted the seed there with Macca's, but yes. AC/DC is Akadaka, which is not really shorter, but it's not shorter like to spell, but it's a little easier to say. AC/DC Akadaka.
It's faster to say.
Yeah,
for sure. Yeah. Not shorter, but faster.
And like all nicknames, I suspect that, they came up with that because they're talking about AC/DC so often that it would be an impediment to their daily lives to have to say the name as written. So instead you kind of, you find an easier way to say it.
Yeah. That makes sense. Kind of like we say, I can't think of a good example. I was going to make a joke and I thought I had one and it was just gone.
Well, the producers will edit it out by the time it airs to anybody.
I won't. I'm leaving it in.
Yeah. Never mind. You're the producers that I'm referring to.
Yes, I knew that.
I'm just the talent in the hair. I just show up and talk about nonsense.
Oh, that's what we're here for. But I do need to tell you something before we dive headfirst in. And I've been kind of saving this for the podcast because it's just a really odd story. But as a man of the internet, these things happen. Okay. Mm-hmm. So I had a guy reach out to me the other day. And he was a salesman, and you've been through this before. And so he's trying to sell me like a pre-order on a coffin. Like he wants to sell me a casket. And so I just told him, buddy, that's the last thing I'm ever going to need.
Well, I think that there's some circumstances where that would make sense, because you can be sure that by the time you pass, your loved ones will want to put you in something very like plain and austere, because they're going to be like, the memory of, my dear brother, father, whatever. So if you want a joke coffin, you really have to buy it already and make it really clear. Like if you want the Jolly Roger on there and everything, or flames coming up the side, they're never going to pick that for you. That like has to be yeah, exactly. He bought this casket. It's clear that he wanted that Hulk Hogan yellow casket with the Hulkster tearing his shirt open on the top. That's only going to happen if you buy it ahead of time.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, I didn't. That didn't actually happen. I just really wanted to say that line. I heard it as a dad joke the other day, and I'm like, I'm saying that on a podcast sometime. I'm going to say.
What was the dad joke?
That's the last thing I'll ever need.
Oh, that. Yeah. I see. I kind of glossed over that.
Yeah. I was like, yeah, no, it's because you're not dad yet.
That's true.
Yeah, didn't quite stick. Yeah.
I'm somewhat impervious to the dad jokes just yet.
I was like, man, that's a good one. I'm gonna use that.
That is a pretty good one.
Yeah. I was like, I don't know how I'm gonna wedge it in there, so I'm just gonna have to wedge it in there. But let's talk about Akadaka.
Okay, we're gonna talk about Akadaka. If you insist, I will take us there.
Please do.
There's a long history of AC/DC, but we're going to be kind of zooming in on one particular very pivotal moment in the history of AC/DC. So to get there, I would like you to close your eyes and imagine it's 1979. Highway to Hell cracked the U.S. top 20. It's the first gold record for AC/DC. They go on this crazy big world tour. It's 140 shows in some 18 months. I've even found a few counts that are higher. You can open your eyes up now. Good.
Okay.
I've even found some quotes that said they did like 230 shows, but I can only find 140 listed. But, who knows if there's after parties or basement shows or, goodness knows what else. Mm-hmm. So the band is finding this like enormous success. Like a lot of bands, they kind of broke into the US market in a really big way, which is like super important to, Aussie and English bands and stuff in the 60s and 70s. And they're just touring all over, kicking up dirt and slinging mud all over the US and world for that matter. So they're huge.
I can't remember if I told you this, but on that tour, the very first US tour, they were playing like college shows just everywhere. They're playing just constantly. And this won't mean a lot to the listeners, but it'll mean something to you. My friend Gary Winder, who is a mentor of mine, he was at one of those shows at college. He saw that tour, and he was like standing 5 feet away from AC/DC at one of those shows.
Holy cow.
Yeah.
That would be amazing.
So cool. Such a cool story.
I do think that they have the kind of music that would like punch through on a first show. Like there's been bands that I've seen open and been like, that was pretty good. And then later they get big and I discover like, oh, I love this band. And I heard those songs, but they didn't quite like come through in the same way. Mm-hmm. But I feel like you hear AC/DC and you're like, yep, I got it. That is that. It totally translates. Especially
at that time, right? Mm-hmm. That's one of those, well, we've never heard this before.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. And I mean, like, there's some stuff kind of like AC/DC, but not synthesized in quite the way.
Right.
I think the Stooges are like the primordial soup of a lot of this type of music. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't hit quite the same way that AC/DC does.
It's a different vibe.
Yeah, for sure. So, anyway, at this point, they've really kind of like they've achieved that. It's the part in the movie where there's a great montage and Manfred Mann plays or something, and the cash is piling up, and they're jumping in on the tour bus and driving off, and there are women everywhere, that usual thing. And there's a quote from Angus Young. This might be apocryphal, but at the time he said, "We've been living on that highway to hell for real." Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Couldn't find if it actually existed, but I like to think that it did because it kind of worked.
I like it too. Yeah.
And AC/DC in this period, this is the Highway to Hell era, is led by none other than Bon Scott, their legendary first singer, which might be what we're kind of talking about. So Bon Scott is 5'8", but you would typically think 5'8", like, oh, he's a little guy, and like maybe he kind of is. No offense, but I added this to my notes because I wanted to cover it specifically, though it's not that germane. So the heights of the members of AC/DC. Mm-hmm. Angus Young is 5'2". I don't know if you've ever seen that photo of Angus Young next to his bodyguard with his girlfriend.
Yes,
and he's like 7 feet shorter than his bodyguard.
Yes.
His brother Malcolm, a little bit taller. Malcolm's 5'3". Brian Johnson, 5'5". Not in the band at this time, but will be. Hint, hint. Phil's 5'6", and Cliff is 5'7". So all these guys are kind of little dudes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. 5'7" is what I would consider ideal. But, you
aren't you 5'8"? Are you 5'7"?
I'm 5'7". Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm. I thought you were 5'8", and you were like, I'd really like to lose an inch. I consider myself just about an inch too tall.
No, I got to get step stools for everything.
And to be fair, like these guys are little dudes, but also like I think at least 3 of them would add up to your like body mass.
Yeah, they're on the thinner side.
Yeah,
for sure. Mm-hmm.
There's some that whole band is probably, I don't know, 700 pounds between them.
Right.
Maybe not even that. Maybe 600 pounds.
Yeah. They're small, but they're mighty.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. So, anyway, next to the rest of these guys, Bon Scott looks like your kind of prototypical tall, skinny, limber frontman. Mm-hmm. And he's got this like infectious charm and this like super, I think his voice is very, very punk. I love his like sort of like guttural, like whine almost.
Yeah.
It's a very unique voice. How would you characterize it?
It borders on a scream for most of it. It's not really, because we obviously listen to a lot of things that have actual screams in it. It's not a full blown scream, but it's very jagged sounding. It's cool. It's very identifiable.
I sometimes wonder, and maybe this will be an idea, a kernel for a future podcast, but like, who was the first person to do like a hardcore style scream? Like the like, like that scream.
I've been trying to figure that out for a while. I feel like that's got to be actually kind of late. Later than you would think.
I've never heard anything from the 70s that had it, or even really the 80s, though it wouldn't surprise me if somebody in the 80s did one.
I think it comes from like more like the black metal and death metal world, and then it kind of segued, because hardcore back in like the 70s and 80s was mostly like yelling, like shouting. Yeah. And then the screaming that you're describing really kind of evolved out of like the more black metal, death metal stuff, I think.
Yeah, because it's like the minor threat, like sort of like there's some screaminess happening there, but it's not the same thing. It's not that like low guttural thing. It's more like a Bon Scott style scream, really.
Yeah, exactly. It's not like a Lamb of God type of situation or something.
No, definitely not. Definitely not.
But that definitely comes more from what I'm talking about, from the Black and Death, because they were like a kind of a borderline black metal band before they were what they are now. So that
AC/DC.
No, Lamb of God. Yes. But anyway, I think it kind of evolved out of that scene, if I had to take a wild stab at it.
That makes sense. But yeah,
also, I think AC/DC inspired that stuff in a lot of ways.
Totally. And yeah, for the time, like, you know, Bon Scott's, he's screaming, he's living hard, he's doing the whole thing. Like, my favorite AC/DC song has always been Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap.
That's great. Yeah, I love that song.
And he just like embodies this character that he is in the song. I couldn't imagine anyone else doing that song so well.
Yeah.
Right.
Love it.
So with our setting kind of painted here, AC/DC's on top of the world, Bon Scott's on the top of the heap. Everything is just cruising along, right? So let's fast forward just a little bit to the 18th of February, 1980. We're at the Music Machine Club in Camden. They put on a show. Bon leaves with his friend Alistair Kinnear, and he passes out in Kinnear's Renault 5, parked at 67 Overhill Road in East Dulwich. I don't know what a Renault 5 looks like exactly, but I've seen a number of Renaults, at least when I'm in Europe. You never see them here.
No, I don't think I've ever seen one in person.
Really? They're all over Europe.
I guess I take it back. I saw them when I was over there, but I don't think I've ever seen one in the States. I'm sure they're here, but it's rare.
Mm-hmm. So in any case, there is a Renault 5, and Bon Scott passes out in it late at night. And the next day, the 19th of February, around 7:30, Bon is found unresponsive and pronounced dead at King's College Hospital. The coroner ruled it as acute alcohol poisoning. And they include this death by misadventure. Yeah, which is I think an official like legal term. I think it basically is just implying that like
it was an accident.
He did it to himself at some level. Yeah, like if he jumped off a bridge and it didn't quite work out. But
that makes sense.
It sounds funny.
It does sound. It sounds like you and your scallywag cousins were hunting for treasure and something happened. It's what it sounds like.
It does a little bit. It does a little bit. And this, I haven't looked it up, but I think this is not too far removed or far ahead of when John Bonham passed away in basically the very same way. I believe he also passed away in a car.
I think you're right. Let me while you tell the tale, let me check on that. I can.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't want to gloss over that this is an incredibly sad moment.
It's horrible
in all of this. But I do want to kind of go through a few different conflicting accounts, right? So the official record was acute alcohol poisoning. So basically, the official record is that he partied too hard, drank too much, and died of basically, an alcohol overdose. Mm-hmm. His body temperature was noted as low, but not noted as decisive. There's no mention of like drugs, hypothermia, anything like that in the official record. But there are a few other kind of competing theories that are involved in this. So some people note that it was likely that he possibly could have died from hypothermia instead of the alcohol itself. February in London is like in the Fahrenheits that we know here in the States.
Freedom units,
is like freedom units. Yes, just under 40 freedom units. He's just wearing like jeans and a t-shirt and like a light denim jacket. So it's pretty cold. So, some people suggest that, perhaps it wasn't that he drank like so much, enough to kill you at least, but just kind of went there and fell asleep. That caused him to die of hypothermia. I saw some indications that if he were to experience hypothermia after having taken in a bit of alcohol, that would potentially spike up your BAC reading for some reason. A little bit beyond me in terms of like the actual biology of that, but
I do know that alcohol consumption will make it more likely that you will catch hypothermia.
Yes, that I have also heard as well. Plus, it's more likely that you're not going to notice it,
and you're not going to feel it. You'll feel warm.
Yeah, exactly. So there's another theory that it could have been heroin or a slew of other drugs. Journalist Jesse Fink says that like some insiders that he interviewed insisted that he had snorted heroin that night, potentially. He was allegedly terrified of needles, so he would have just snorted it. The supporters of this theory say that the metabolite would have cleared quickly, leaving alcohol to take the medical blame and them not notice that the drug was there in his system. Again, I am not in any way a toxicologist in any way, but this is just what the supporters of that theory suggest. Another interesting note, there was kind of a rare interview with Alistair Kinnear, the last person that he was seen with, where he claimed that he had checked on Bon late in the evening and then once again early in the morning. But the police report didn't suggest that happened, and it suggested that he had just checked in later. So that's a bit odd, but at the same time, I mean, we're talking about 26 years later that this was done. So memory is a curious thing. Some people have, taken a few of these different theories or just generally suggested that there could have been something else going on. The police had like seemingly implied that he had choked on his vomit, hence the alcohol poisoning. But there is allegedly no vomit found in the footwells, though that seems to be speculative, the research that I was able to find. There were some questions about that. Allegedly, he was in the passenger seat from the research that I saw. And the question was like, why was he in there? I even saw, this is like big grain of salt on this, but there were some allegations that he had a pocket notebook that contained like lyric ideas that he would jot down that was not found on his body, but he went everywhere with. Again, this feels to me, alarms all over.
If you're
that's very
hammered,
speculative.
The pocket that gets lost real easy.
Yeah, I very much agree. So, none of these like necessarily grab me or really are super all that relevant to me either personally, whether it was like he did some drugs or it was just alcohol or he fell asleep or it doesn't make that much of a difference here. I don't think. I
don't either. And I, as somebody who does like the occasional tipple, I do have to I feel like I say this a lot because society seems to forget it. Alcohol is actually a very hard drug. We've just normalized it. It's one of the only drugs that can kill you if you're physically addicted to it.
That's a really good point.
Hey, what's up, folks? This is Editing Blake coming at you from the Shred Shed the night before this episode drops. I want to clarify what I meant there because I didn't quite finish my thought, and I think it's rather important. What I meant to say was alcohol is one of the only drugs that can kill you once you're physically addicted to it when you come off of it. That's why detox centers are really important, and this information I think is pretty important to get out there because alcohol has become so normalized that we don't think about that when it comes to extreme examples of this. So that's what I meant to say there, just putting this in for posterity. All right. And so, there's this debate, whoa, it was heroin, oh, it was booze. I'm like, alcohol is actually pretty rough on your system. It really is. And he did a lot of it. And so to me, I'm like, you're doing an excessive amount of some sort of substance and it caused you to pass. I think it is valuable to know what that is because it helps people stay informed and all that stuff. So I would hope that there would be some specificity there, but it doesn't change the fact that we lost an incredible artist at a very young age. That's ultimately what really happened.
Absolutely. And that's a really good note. You're absolutely right. I mean, we just normalize alcohol. It's a normal social thing that we all do, but getting really, really drunk puts you in a state, equivalent to some of the hardest, quote unquote, hardest drugs that exists.
Oh yeah.
I think the difference is probably just that you can have a glass of wine and feel a little buzzy and you don't really hear about anybody having just a little bit of heroin.
Right.
It seems like that's it's either a lot or it's not at all.
Oh, I had my afternoon heroin,
Yeah, with the microdosing trend, I don't know I've heard of people microdosing, well, marijuana for sure, and like LSD and mushrooms and stuff like this. I haven't quite heard anyone like microdosing those types of narcotics, but maybe that exists.
I think those tend to be macro doses.
They do tend to be.
Mm-hmm.
Don't know what that's all about.
Stay away from that stuff, kids.
Yeah, you should.
It's bad. It's very bad.
I pride myself on opening myself up to as many experiences as possible in life, but there are a few things that I think are better to not experience.
Yeah, I'm good with not experiencing those ones. I've had enough friends die that I'm like, nah.
Same. I don't know if I told you this. About 3% of my, so I'm 34. About 3% of my grade and the grade above and below me are all no longer with us. Mostly due to opiates, frankly.
Wow, that's a high percentage. I couldn't put a number on mine, but I've had, in particular, one very close friend that was taken by heroin. So
yeah,
it was terrifying to see. It was horrible. That is one that I'm like, yeah, I'm with you. I'm like, I think people should be able to kind of do what they want. I think the United States drug policy is a little dumb, but there are some things that, yeah, that's just not good. There's nothing good that's going to come out of that.
It's not good for you. Yeah. No. And with the people that I know that we lost, a number of them, you kind of think of everyone like overdosing, right? And there's this like, they're just found unresponsive. A number of them were circumstances where somebody just like slipped and fell, but were on a very high dose of some opiate. And that made it harder for them to get up and get help, or even to know maybe that they were in as bad of a situation as they were in. So it's not quite as cut and dry as just like anything below the lethal dose and you're fine.
Nope. You introduce those things into your system or into the elements, and things get wonky real fast.
Yeah. But somber notes all around. That is to say, I can feel for this circumstance. I'm sure everyone out there has lost somebody at a young age due to some form of misadventure. And it's worth noting that the Scott family at the time and still, as far as I can tell, have always kind of said like, hey, it doesn't really matter. They consider the official ruling definitive and don't in any way encourage like the various conspiracy theories and such. And I should note, I haven't been able to find a quote from the family specifically about that, but it's noted by a few different biographers that basically they're like, no, what happened. There's no, it's not a alien CIA, FBI sort of circumstance.
Yeah. It's a lot more cut and dry than some of the other cases we've covered on this podcast for sure.
Yeah, exactly. So, the aftermath of this like kind of horrible evening, Angus Young gets the call in Sydney time zone. He's back home from what I heard. And I noted earlier that he had played that show. I think that I misspoke and that he was maybe just hanging out or at a show. Okay. In any case, I just know that they were kind of off in terms of time zones one way or another. And the quote that we have from Angus is, at first I didn't believe it. It was like losing a member of the family, maybe even worse. Getting this horrible news, and certainly not something you'd expect when you're riding high and you're all fairly young. There were band meetings, and Phil Rudd said, I thought that was it. I thought that we were finished. And you can kind of imagine, being in a band at this point, and you're at the height of your popularity, but you lose your lead singer. And it's
very unique
unique lead singer. And it's worth noting, I think, that if in modern times, if you lost a lead singer and then we're having a debate as to like, what do we do? The example that people would call back to of like, oh, it's possible, is just AC/DC.
Yes.
And of course they didn't have AC/DC as reference. So at this time, I mean, I'm sure there are some, but I can't really think of any lead singer swaps that existed by, we're in 1980 right now. I should say Sabbath, Ronnie James Dio replaced Ozzy and Sabbath, right?
Yeah. And there's some great music here that came out of that, but I think still to this day, you think Black Sabbath, you picture Ozzy Osbourne. I love Dio, but that's not what I picture in my head when I think of Black Sabbath. It's always Ozzy.
No, me either. So, they're having this debate, and I think that, if I was in that meeting, I think that most people would land on, we should hang it up. How are we ever going to be able to replace this guy?
Yeah, 100%.
And that's a very logical place you'd land.
Yeah. I mean, I can't even imagine like holding tryouts for that. It'd be so weird.
Well, and we're going to get into that. Don't you worry.
Okay. All right.
So, and again, perhaps apocryphal, though I found it quoted in The Guardian from 2005, was basically that Bon Scott's family told the Young brothers, like, Bon would hate it if you stopped in some form or fashion. Like, don't stop. Keep going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so ultimately, and again, I can't imagine how much debate would go into this decision, but ultimately they decide, all right, we're going to keep going.
Mm-hmm.
We just got to find a new lead singer to replace Bon Scott. However the heck you do that.
That'll be so easy. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So they were scheduled to go ahead and start recording an album at this time. So, management, everything's in disarray with management and the label and all that. They're trying to arrange, they're of course trying to figure out how are we going to find a singer and how long is that going to take? And then we've got to work on the bookings and making sure we have the studio booked and all this. And at the same time, you have Atlantic, the record label, wanting a decision on this before they're advancing more and more money for studio time that they don't know what band is left.
Right.
And you have to figure too, if you're Atlantic, you're like, okay, this is a great act that we have. They're making a ton of money. They're super popular, but who are they going to replace the guy with?
Mm-hmm.
If it were me, I would be very hesitant to want to pile money into that, not knowing how the heck it was going to go.
Yeah, I mean, this might be one of the situations where I'm just speculating here, where a contract was actually beneficial because they they probably signed for a certain amount of albums.
Yep, with a guaranteed advance.
Yep, and so they're like, I guess they're gonna do whatever they're gonna do if they're gonna keep being a band.
Yeah, if they're the band, then we're on the hook for it. Yeah, I would imagine. Mm-hmm. So basically, you get this sense of at this time. This is March, so I mean, we're talking about the month after. Was that just in February? Yeah,
mm-hmm.
Very, very quickly. And in fact, now that I noted it, just looking back in my notes, the report that I have from the coroner is from April 1st, 1980.
Oh, wow.
Even though the death happened, the evening of the February 18th. And then here we are, in March trying to figure it out. So seemingly, at least from the notes that I have, they don't even necessarily know the official cause of death at this time. Is like how sudden this is all really playing out that they're having to figure out what the heck do we do next.
Mm-hmm. Because like you said, they were scheduled to be in studio.
Yeah.
So that's very expensive, as we've talked about a bunch on this podcast.
Yeah. So I just have it noted as March that we're going through this, but you're looking at 2-3 weeks later,
mm-hmm.
one way or another. Right.
Wow.
So the band sets up at Vanilla Studios in Pimlico, and they arrange a couple of different tryouts for different singers to come in. So there's a few different people on the docket. We have Terry Slessor, who is in the band Backstreet Crawler. He performs a couple of songs, and I should say all of the notes about what's happening here at the studio when they're trying out people are apocryphal. I couldn't find. There's a lot of stories that are going around about what happened. My favorite one that I could not substantiate was that Malcolm Young was set up there on a chair. And they'd have the guys go through 3 or 4 songs. And when he had heard enough, what might be mid-song or whatever, he would just take his finger and just, put it right underneath his throat, like in the sort of throat slitting notion. And then everything would just stop. They would just pull the plug.
All done.
Seems a little ridiculous.
But it's very late 70s, early 80s rock star behavior. So maybe it is real.
I have no idea as far as that goes. So, Terry Slessor auditions. I've heard some notes that he nailed a few and less so on some others. So that didn't quite work out. Alan Fryer was in the band Rose Tattoo, said that, again, apocryphal here, was that he was trying to be Bon a little bit too hard. And they're like, oh, he's doing that. Maybe that's a little bit too much. Don't know if that worked out or not. My favorite is that there's a guy named Steve Birdie Burton, who was a roadie at the time, who auditioned. And the stories that I found about him was that it didn't go great, but he was like, I don't know, guys, what if you took a shot at it? What if you tried me out?
Come on.
Maybe you're right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. And then one other person, Noddy Holder, was invited.
These names are out of control.
Declined.
I love this.
Yeah, you're talking about 1980 rockers in London one way or another, right?
So good.
you have a couple of people coming in performing, a few different songs for the band, and they're kind of auditioning. And I could feel for those guys sitting in those chairs and listening to these singers, because I'm sure all these guys sound like they're very accomplished and very, very good singers. Some of which we know because they were in other bands. But it's also a question of like, how is this going to replace Bon?
Mm-hmm.
Like, does this work for us? And that'd be really hard.
Yeah. I was just thinking about this when we were talking about replacing lead singers. We've actually seen this play out in the public eye very recently with Linkin Park.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And Chester Bennington's another, like, how are you going to rereplace Chester Bennington?
Yep.
Like, pretty iconic, unique voice, kind of similar situation there. How are you gonna do that? And they're doing the best they can, type of thing. So, wow. Yeah. I'm going through the process in my head as saying, okay, I'm gonna audition for this.
Oh.
I need to be sort of like Bon,
but not too much
like Bon.
Mm-hmm.
So how do I walk that line? Even if I'm able to produce those sounds, you kind of want to be yourself, but it really needs to sound like this.
Yeah, because for a fact you're gonna be singing the old songs. They're not gonna never play those again. You both need to be able to like make new music with the band that like fits where they want to go, and also to be able to night after night do the Bon Scott songs at some convincing level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is such a tough line to walk.
It'd be really tricky, and I can think of a few. I believe didn't Static X replace Wayne Static with like a man in a mask that it was unclear who he was?
Yeah,
he was wearing like a Wayne Static mask, kind of.
He still does, and I think they've identified him now. I can't remember that. Don't quote me on that, but I believe he's been identified now. But the reason he's still wearing the mask and stuff is because he's like, we're still doing Wayne's songs. Like, he still wants to present, kind of Wayne's iconic look and everything.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah. He's like, I don't want it to be about me. It's more about Wayne, and I'm just kind of the conduit for it.
That makes total sense. I also, last aside before we dive in back into the AC/DC story, but I remember when Limp Bizkit was trying out, I think there was like an MTV thing or something in the 2000s when they were replacing Wes Borland. And I have like a sense memory of watching this on TV and Eddie Van Halen trying out for Wes Borland.
I don't remember this at all.
I could have. This sounds like a weird dream I would have, but I'm relatively sure I saw it. And they obviously didn't pick Eddie. But I guess that kind of, if we assume that what I'm remembering is correct in any way, that does speak to, it's not just about being talented. It's about like, are you the right fit?
Oh yeah, and Wes is very unique too. Like, his playing is awesome and very him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So we went through a couple of different people that tried out or declined trying out. None of those guys were selected. But there was one other kind of out of the box idea. This guy from Geordie, he's an English guy named Brian Johnson. And remember, of course, all the AC/DC guys are Aussies. So many, many years later, Angus Young recounted that Bon Scott had actually like heard Brian Johnson and kind of endorsed him in it while he was alive, saying that he sounded like Little Richard up on stage and that he was one of the, just a fantastic singer in every way. So they pull this guy in, Brian Johnson, on 29th of March, 1980. So again, here we're math 6 weeks out from Bon Scott passing away. Brian Johnson, the story is that he drove overnight from Newcastle. He'd been gigging. He was a factory worker. His voice was hoarse. He's pretty exhausted, right? And this is just like a working class English dude leaving the factory and coming out to try out to be the lead singer of AC/DC.
Where did they hear him? Was he just like playing night gigs or something?
He had been a frontman in bands, but not, as far as I know, anything like, big enough note.
Okay.
But he was around. He'd been singing, right? So he goes in, he comes into the room, and he sings, his first song is Tina Turner's Nutbush City Limits.
Okay.
And apparently, and I wish we could hear this, but apparently he just nails it. And I love that he chose a Tina Turner song too.
That's awesome. I love that.
I've been trying to, is there a word for visualize that's auditory? Like hearialize?
Audiolize?
Audiolize. Yeah. I like that. I've been trying to audiolize what that would sound like in my head with him. Like, I don't know if he was a cappella or what. But he just stuns them basically. They're like, that's the guy. That's the voice. And I think it's so interesting because Bon Scott his voice it's not Bon Scott's voice, but it's not totally incompatible with Bon Scott's voice.
No, it's close enough that as a somewhat more casual AC/DC fan, I once in a while I'm like, oh, which one? Oh yeah, that's Brian Johnson. You know, like it takes me a second sometimes to remember which is where, but you can definitely tell a difference.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Bon's is a little bit lower and snarlier to me, and Brian Johnson's is higher and more just like, I want to say pure, but of course it's like this airy, screamy tone.
He's a little more hair metal.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. He doesn't look it.
No. But he is a little bit
that way.
Yeah. Vocally, it's just like slightly more in that style, I think.
Mm-hmm. So Brian is like quickly picked to be the guy. And this is happening pretty fast. Mm-hmm. This band phone call on April 8th, 1980, to extend the offer, and he accepts it. There's a public announcement. I'm sorry, I missaid that. That was later in February or in March. So that was a little bit earlier in the timeline. They announced it in early April 1980. And there's some quotes at the time from Brian Johnson that he's like, even after he accepted this, he's like, I thought that they were gonna figure me out and give me the boot anytime. Once they really got to know me and got familiar with it, and had me writing lyrics and be like really involved in the process. Mm-hmm. And that's one thing that I think is kind of cool. Like they didn't. There are some famous examples of bands letting new members in, but being like, you're not going to write any songs. We've got that. You're just gonna sing the songs or play guitar or bass on the songs the way that we tell you to.
Yeah.
From all reports, that's not exactly what happens. He's kind of expected to be very much a member of the band. Yeah. So, you can imagine being him, and Brian Johnson's a legend, but this time, like, this band's already huge. You're the new lead singer. All eyes are on you. Mm-hmm. What are you going to do? And I think it's interesting because they jump not straight out to tour. They're not like really workshopping this out on the road and figuring it out. It's not like Queen with Adam Lambert, where they're just like, we're going to keep touring and you're just going to sing the Bon Scott songs so that we can make money.
Right.
Their first act, because as we already know, they're already kind of booked to record the next album. Their first act is to jump into the studio.
Wow. Man, that's got to be such a wild thing to go from, I don't know what kind of factory he was working in, but I'm just like picturing him like stamping out shoes or something. I have no idea what he was doing, to like, oh, I quit. Why do you quit? Because I'm joining AC/DC. And everyone would be like, no, you're not. Like, what are you talking about? Like, is this guy unwell? What's wrong with? He's not joining AC/DC, but he is joining AC/DC. Not only that, he's quitting his rather mundane factory job to jump immediately into the studio with them and start writing and recording new material.
Yep.
What a wait.
And I'm going to take you to that studio because it's not just that, but they're also leaving England, and they're recording in what I thought was a fairly unexpected place for this. They're going to Compass Point Studios in Nassau in the Bahamas.
Oh, that's not what I would have guessed.
No, and they go like basically straight there. They're there in April and May of 1980 for about 6-7 weeks. So this is Chris Blackwell, who owns Island Records. We talked about him when we were talking about Lee Scratch Perry a little bit. He's the guy who found Bob Marley, super legendary dude. He has this big kind of compound there in Nassau that has a studio in it where a lot of bands recorded, and still, I believe, record. It's a very, very legendary spot. Tough Gong and Compass Point. So, the gear has to be carried across the sand, to get right. I imagine them arriving by boat at some level. They're right there. They're like on an island recording Back in Black, which is just crazy.
Yeah. And 2 weeks ago, I was in the factory cobbling whatever. Like,
yeah, exactly.
So crazy.
And there's a lot of cool stories about this. So a lot of the stories that we have from the recording of Back in Black comes from interviews with Tony Platt, who was the engineer there. So that's where I'm getting a lot of this sort of stuff from. The coolest and I think most like legendary story of it is on day one of the studio session, a tropical storm goes rolling through the Bahamas. So you've got roofs rattling, rain coming down. Sounds like all hell is breaking loose, basically. And so Brian Johnson, who newly is now writing lyrics, right, for AC/DC at least. So he starts writing, roaring thunder, pouring rain, I'm coming on like a hurricane. which is Hell's Bells, right?
Yep.
This is all inspired by this like tropical cyclone, allegedly.
That's
that was
one of my
rolling
favorite
through.
AC/DC songs. Is Hell's
Oh,
Bells. Heck
yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
Yeah, and the story is that there was like the 2,000-pound bell that they recorded for the start of there is in England. But the story
cool.
is that he was like calling on the phone to like get the sound of the bell and trying to get the band to sync up with the sound and all this sort of stuff. And I should say by the way. So the producer here is Mutt Lange.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
who had already been working with AC/DC previously. But some listeners out there may know him for his illustrious later work with Shania Twain.
Yep. I mean, he's got a huge bunch of credits. I can't even remember. Yeah. He's done a lot of stuff.
He did the Strokes' First Impressions of Earth. He did all the Shania stuff. They were married.
I was going to say, I thought they were married. Okay.
Yeah. Funny note. I was many years ago. I was at like a dinner party with a girl who also shares my love of 90s country, and she had a Now That's What I Call Country on vinyl.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
She put it on and we're all kind of listening. And one of the Shania Twain songs comes on. I'm not sure which one. And the other guy who was there, her now husband, who's a drummer, he was listening to it and had heard it, but hadn't really listened to it on a hi-fi system. And he was like, those are Def Leppard drums. And I was like, that is so interesting that you say that, because that is exactly what they are. That's Mutt Lange. That's the same guy. And ever since then, I hadn't quite picked it out myself either. But now when I listen back to the Shania, there's these big gated arena rock drums happening underneath the Shania Twain songs.
Yeah. It's somebody pointed that out to me one time, specifically they were the Def Leppard drums, and I almost can't hear anything else now. Like, listen to that. that. That's so cool. I love that.
Yeah. To me, it sometimes takes me out of it. Like, I'm like, that's a bit of an interesting choice for that particular music. But I mean, who can argue with success? I mean, Shania Twain was like a god of the 90s. She still is. How dare I?
Yes.
How dare I say just the 90s?
Just the 90s. Still to this day.
Yeah. So this is Mutt Lange, and Mutt Lange's, he's a dude. There's a lot of rumors and things around how he recorded this, things about him like having Phil Rudd do like 25 consecutive takes on the kick drum to get the sound just right. Or like him like really having Brian Johnson like work really closely on the You Shook Me All Night Long vocal takes, just doing like word by word or line by line to get it to work just right. All sorts of crazy stuff. And again, hard to know exactly what was real there.
Right.
There's a lot of studio stories out in the world.
I love studio stories. Studio stories are my favorite.
Yes, they're the best. Whether like I assume that maybe a third of them are like true,
right,
of how they actually came up, but they're fun regardless. So we do have a bit of a picture of what it looked like. They would like, there was water, there was like surfing happening. They'd have breakfast, they'd track at noon, they'd do rewrites, while drinking rum at the bar, and then they'd like go and sit outside and listen to playbacks later in the evening, out in a beautiful like Nassau night. So it sounds like they're having a good time. That
sounds like a dream come true.
They're getting shook all night long. Yeah, that sounds fantastic to me. And especially listening to this record, I know I keep drilling on about this, but like a lot of bands that record in Jamaica, as like a pretty big fan of Jamaican music, they really lean into the Jamaican thing one way or the other. Like No Doubt was already a little bit that way, but when they went and did the Rocksteady album down in, I think they were at Tough Gong for that one, I can't recall. They sound very Jamaican. Obviously like late 70s, early 80s, like I've noted in other episodes, this is when like Eric Clapton's doing a reggae song and Elvis Costello's kind of reggae. Like all the English musicians are doing The Police. Their whole band is just like a white guy, blue-eyed reggae thing. So AC/DC very much doesn't do that.
No, they didn't let that infiltrate their sound at all.
No, it would have been kind of fun, but I think it's probably good that they did.
Yeah. Stick to what they do.
Yeah. So, despite like this being kind of amazing, and like a lot of bands that record, especially in like the heyday of the music industry, would take forever. Yes. Because they had the label's money, and which was really just an advance that they would have to then recoup later down the line. But they'd really enjoy themselves in a very nice place for a while. That doesn't happen here. It's like 6-7 weeks basically that they're recording this thing, and they're done.
which sounds long to modern musicians.
Well, that's a good point. At that time, that's pretty expedient.
Yeah. Yep. I mean, I think the Replacements, who were nowhere near as big as AC/DC, would go into the studio for just ridiculous amounts of time. Now, granted, that's because they were hammered most of the time, but it was just like, I can't remember what the time for them going in and recording at Pachyderm was, but it was something. I think it was Pachyderm. I might be screwing that up, but it was something that sounded ridiculous to me. I can't even remember what it was. Maybe it was only like 3 weeks, but I'm used to like, we got a week, quick, hurry up. That's what I'm used to. So
Pachyderm's the one in Minnesota where In Utero was, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I believe the Replacements recorded there as well. I might be mixing that up, but I think that's right.
I think that a lot of stuff's been cut there, so that would make total sense. I remember Steve Albini talking about like the Pachyderm sessions for In Utero.
It sounds like a really cool place.
It does. Yeah. One of those studios is just kind of out of the way.
Yep.
Where you go to not really be too distracted.
That's the whole idea. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So anyway, back to AC/DC. They wrapped this record. Reports are that it cost less than a typical recording would have in London. I think things are a little bit cheaper in Jamaica. They're able to live on site. So despite it being kind of lovely, sounds like they were able to do it economically as well.
Very nice.
And they released this album not very long thereafter. It's coming out in like July or August in 1980. This is like 5 months after Bon Scott's death.
I did not realize this was so fast.
It's all really, really quick. And this album, of course, I imagine even once they finish it, there's always a thing when you're a musician where you feel like you have lightning in a bottle, but it can be hard to know. Until it really goes out. I wonder how many bands have been like, oh, you're never going to believe this record we've got. It's the best thing we've ever done. And then it just totally collapses out in the public eye.
Oh, probably more often than not.
Yeah. So, I'm sure everyone is very confident at some level, but at some level, you've got to just be a little bit mortified of what the public's going to think.
Especially with this kind of pressure. I mean, they're this is like, oh, you got the new singer and and it's not the internet age, right? 5 months later was still like fresh news to some people. So.
Oh, very much so. I mean, I think even today, it would be really new. Sorry, I was looking something up here really quick. So they come out with this album that quick, right? And Back in Black, I mean, it is hard to overstate how legendary this record is. Like you've got Hell's Bells, you've got You Shook Me All Night Long, Shoot to Thrill, Have a Drink on Me, which I understand to be about Bon Scott himself. Back in Black, man, what a record.
Everyone, it's one of those things, how in our world we're thinking like, oh yeah, everybody knows Epiphone, but not really, that's the general public knows Gibson, and Fender, and that's pretty much it as far as electric guitars go. But they do know them, and if somebody's not even a rock fan, they know Back in Black. They do. You've heard that song before. There's just no way that you've existed in Western civilization and not heard that song at some point, unless you can't hear anything at all.
Absolutely. Or You Shook Me All Night Long.
Yeah, seriously. You've heard that. You heard it somewhere at some point.
Yeah, these are everywhere. And I mean, I don't think I'm at risk of misspeaking to say this album is on every single list of the best albums of all time that has any more than 10 entries. And even if it's there, I mean, I believe it's one of the top 10 selling albums of all time, or at least was at one point. This is the record. They didn't just turn around and change a lead singer and get by.
No, they flourished.
They absolutely they made their in many ways their masterpiece. At least commercially, it's their masterpiece. Even though you could argue all day long about how many great songs there are on the earlier records and things. Of course, but I mean, this is absolutely in every way a crowning achievement. And they go on the tour, and as you can imagine, that tour is absolutely bonkers. They're playing sold out arenas all over everywhere. Yeah, everyone wants to see AC/DC, in real life. After this is just absolutely huge. And there's a quote from Brian as well that basically going through this, he's like, every night I still feel Bon over my shoulder saying, "Give him hell, lad."
Yeah, that's awesome.
Which I
love
absolutely love.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That makes me a little bit emotional. Not gonna lie.
I know.
Yeah.
You know, and to go from Brian Johnson, I assume you'd be feeling like an imposter for so long, and then eventually just like absolutely like feeling super at home. I mean, today I feel like AC/DC probably has to spend more time reminding the new generations that there like was a Bon Scott. Than anything else.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, I'm sure that a lot of people who find like young kids who find AC/DC for the first time and get really into it, it takes them a little bit to realize, oh, there's two different eras here.
Yeah,
I didn't know that, because even if you would just like casually listen to it, you might miss it. You might not realize, because there's enough crossover there.
Interesting note, by the way, is that it didn't quite end there, because Brian Johnson's been going through some health troubles more recently, and in recent years, and I believe even like presently, I could be wrong about that. Can you guess who his stand-in is that tours with them?
Who would it be? Who could try to?
I'll give you a hint. It's a person who, in his like best known band, has been covering Whole Lotta Rosie for like eons, for like decades.
Oh, I don't know.
Axel Rose.
Oh, it's Axel Rose?
Yeah.
I was thinking it was going to be somebody like a lot younger.
No. Nope. I mean, Axel Rose is quite a bit younger than the other members of AC/DC.
Well, this is true. Yeah. And I was thinking it was going to be somebody in their 30s.
I imagine they're pulling him over and having him sit on their laps and telling him stories about the old country.
I'm sure they are. I mean, that makes sense though. That's not that shocking. That if I was to try to pick somebody, I guess Axel would probably be a pretty good choice.
Yeah, it makes some sense. And I've always gotten the sense that he's just a huge, like that's a massive inspiration for him. Is AC/DC, probably both Bon Scott and Brian Johnson eras. But I think that this moment is so cool. And you called it out a few times, but I just had no idea of the lightning speed that this happened.
Yeah. Yeah, I did not know.
So quick.
I just can't. I'm just trying to put myself in Brian Johnson's position this whole time. And I'm like, his life completely flipped upside down in a positive way.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
But like, just to go from that to arenas.
Yeah, by September, you're in arenas, and in like April 1st or so, you're getting announced as the lead singer.
Yeah, it's crazy.
What?
I mean, to put it in perspective, for me, I sometimes stand out on my, as we've discussed, I stand outside a lot in the evenings because I'm a dad and that's what you do. And
you sit outside typically.
I'm a stand-in. I'm standing right now.
You just stand in a corner of your yard looking at the fence.
I mostly walk, actually.
We call that walking.
Yeah, mostly walk. But sometimes I'm just kind of chilling on the porch out here. And once in a while, I go, wow, this is crazy that I get to do this for a living. This is really cool. I'm so happy to get to do this.
And then you remember that you're not the lead singer of AC/DC?
And then I'm like, there's that. That would be cooler, right? But does
your family have to sit you down every evening and be like, Dad, you are not the lead singer of AC/DC. We've been over this.
And I go, wait, what? What do you mean? I was just in the arena. I was just singing Back in Black.
No, you weren't, Dad. You were out in the yard, standing in the corner, singing at the fence.
Yeah, you were having another one of your. You were having another one of your episodes, Father.
It was a fugue state.
I routinely go into those. It's a defense mechanism.
You were saying something that made sense before I
don't remember. I don't remember. Oh. Well, I was saying I'm like kind of shocked sometimes that I get to like do a lot of content and stuff for a living. This is really cool because I too was a blue collar worker for many years, and that pales in comparison to what Brian Johnson experienced. Yeah. I mean, it's like it's not even the same thing really. But he had to have felt just like you said, like an imposter for who knows how long.
Yeah, I remember this came up with Chappell Roan when she went from 0 to 100 like really, really quick. And it was really like fast. A few months ago, people were paying attention, but she was small. And then now she's like, there was this Lollapalooza show that was like seemingly the whole city of Chicago is out there watching her. But that's about the timeline we're talking about here. We're talking about like 5 months to go from and to go from like truly nobody, not like I have an album out and there's some fans, but I'm not huge. Absolutely maddening. And it's like it's a trope at this point. But I mean, who competes in any way with this kind of lead singer turnover?
Nobody.
Nothing.
Nobody. They're the only ones that have really pulled it off at this level.
Is there even like a runner-up
that made it work? And this is a substantially smaller band. But the only one that comes to mind that I can think of that was more successful with their a new lead singer would be Under Oath.
Under Oath. Yeah, that's a good example. There's more like that. Oh, goodness. Oh, where it's like they had somebody else really early on and then swapped it over. I think that happened to the Chariot, didn't it? No, not the Chariot. Norma Jean. It
did happen to Norma Jean. Yes. And I think
and then that was Josh Skogan, right? Who went to start the Chariot. Yeah. That's why I was saying that.
Yes. Yeah. And now he's in 68. He's been in like a bunch of different projects and they're all awesome. But Under Oath is the only one I can think of that got like way bigger.
Yeah.
With their second singer.
Yeah. And because somebody's probably screaming, listening to this, Van Hagar has to be mentioned.
But I didn't get
in this
bigger.
Respect.
They just
they did not.
It was parallel. It was or lateral, I should say.
I think that like Van Hagar's like maybe appropriately categorized like from now, but like they were pretty big when it happened.
They were
like
huge.
The "Come On Baby, Finish What You Started" song was a pretty big hit.
Yes,
with Sammy Hagar, and they had a bunch more certainly.
Yeah.
Though they also committed one song that I consider to be a small crime, which was the theme song to the original movie Twister, not Twisters, the original Twister with Helen Hunt.
Yeah.
Do you recall? So there's this song. It's called Human. I believe it's called Humans Being. And it goes because they, I assume, spent some money on this song. It's happening throughout that whole movie. It's always every time they like jump in the car, it's just different snippets of that same freaking song. It's "We're Just Humans Being." I won't do it.
I'm remembering it now. I think my brain had tried to erase it.
Yes, my brain does the same thing, but I have to remind my brain to not.
You gotta hold on to that.
Always remember.
We will not forget. I don't think that in my, it is just my opinion. I'm sure some people are going to disagree with me. I don't think that it is quite what we're talking about. Because I do feel very much that Van Halen did not get more famous with that swap. They were still very famous, but I don't think they got more famous or successful. I think they just continued on doing their thing.
Yeah.
Whereas AC/DC got more famous.
Yep.
And I'm sure there's probably some very obvious examples that we're just like glossing over that my brain's not picking up right now, but AC/DC has to be the number one in that department.
Yeah, I can't think of others, but I'm sure the people out there will let us know. So if you, dear listener, are screaming at a fence somewhere that you're standing right in front of while you're listening to this, thinking these guys completely forgot about blank, the easiest place to let us know would be on the YouTube of this particular episode. If you go over to youtube.com and search Tape Spaghetti, and you'll find whatever we end up titling this thing. And you can let us know there that we were idiots for forgetting all about something or other. Yeah. And we would frankly love to hear from you. So please.
Joey Morris and the Stooge Makers or whatever. I don't know. Franklin Graham and the Graham Crackers. I don't know. I don't know. I'm just making up bands.
I'm not even going to touch that. But please come and tell us what we missed. We love to hear from you. It is our greatest pleasure. Blake and I have both been on the internet for quite some time. We've grown up in the public eye. So we are used to hearing criticisms of everything about us, please let us know.
Everything. Yeah. And also I will add, just because we're talking about this, you can also leave us comments on Spotify now. So,
I didn't realize that.
Yep. So you can let us know there too. And I try to respond to everybody on there. And as always, please share this with a friend, because that is the number one way we can keep going, is if you share this with a friend, interact with this show, all that good internet-y stuff on whatever platform you're listening or watching on. It will help us out a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Well, do we have anything else? You got a bow to tie on this, or did we do it?
I think we tied a bow on it. Well, I think that Brian Johnson tied a bow.
He did.
A black leather bow. I don't know.
I have one of those, but that's a different thing. We don't have.
I need to be put to bed, Blake. You read us out. Why don't you?
Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much. I just want to mention too, this is going to be a little deeper into the episodes, but when this podcast dropped, we actually were ranking on the Apple Podcast charts, which was really surprising. And that's just because you guys all responded to it so nicely. So thank you. We actually ranked it as high as number 5 on the music history charts, just after like 2 days of this existing publicly. And we got as high as 21 on the general music charts. So if you can continue to interact with us on the Apple stuff, we can maybe crack that top 10 one day. And that's where the magic really happens.
There's no thank you quite like feeding Blake and I's egos. We appreciate it.
And my family. So,
and Blake's family.
Yeah. That's really what all this is about at the end of the day.
Well, thank you
so
everybody. Much. We'll catch you next week.
Later.